Hello, this is Ty Hudson, and I'm going to be the interviewer today. My age is 36, and today's date is January 23rd, 2014, and the location of the interview is at the Children's Library here in Gallup, New Mexico.
I'm R.O. Hawthorne. My age is 88. Today is the 23rd of February. Location is Gallup, New Mexico.
Okay, so let's just start with the interview. Let's just talk about your beginnings, I guess. And it says you're 88. So could you tell us, like, what year were you born and where?
Well, actually, I was born at a very early age. I was born in 1926 in Ganado, Arizona. I was born in a hospital. I wasn't sick, but for some reason I was born in a hospital, and that was one of the maybe only or very few hospitals in the Navajo country at that time, and I probably was maybe not the first one, but almost the first one to be born in a hospital. I'm talking about the Navajos now.
Oh, okay. Okay, you were born in Ganado. Who are your parents?
My parents are O.L., initial O.L., that's my father. My mother, Desba, both Hawthorns.
Oh, okay. And where are they both from Ganado too?
Evidently, at that time they were. My mother lived in that area. I went to school at Fort Defiance, and my father was a trader with the Navajo people, and so he had a trading post at a place called Wide Ruins.
Okay, that's out in Arizona too.
Yes.
Okay. Where was your dad originally from?
From Iowa.
Oh, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So he came out west. And
right.
Settled in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And did you have any siblings too?
I had a number of siblings. I had I don't know. I think it's about 5 brothers and a couple of sisters. All of my brothers served in the military during World War II. 2 others were code talkers as well as myself.
Okay. And okay, you grew up in the 20s and the 1930s. So this is during the Great Depression. Yep. And was your family affected from the Great Depression?
Well, probably so. But if my family was affected, it wasn't something that we noticed. All of my life, we had what we needed. We didn't have a lot of things, but we weren't in any hardship situation. We had sheep and other stock that supplemented our income. And at that time, we were living where I'm living now at Lupton. And my parents had I suppose called a native arts outlet store there.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So that was along Route 66.
Yes, that's right.
So do you remember saw any people heading west toward California or trying to make their way toward California?
We saw a lot of people heading west, and sometime later we saw a lot of people heading back to Oklahoma in that great dust storm thing that caused a movement to California. And so we saw a lot of people from faraway places, even places on the East Coast, in New York State and Connecticut, and all across the nation. So Route 66 was really a thoroughfare at that time. We did see a lot of people.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like I just I saw that movie Grapes of Wrath, and I just saw them making their way across Mexico, and I think they might have filmed it out west of town. I'm not too
sure. They did, and they have a shot there of one of my brothers with a bunch of sheep.
Oh, really?
Yeah, crossing the highway.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Oh, right on. So, World War II in Europe, it broke out in 1939, and then 1941, of course, was Pearl Harbor attack. So, when did you join the military?
In 43.
In 43, and
yes.
which branch did you serve?
In the Marine Corps.
In the Marine Corps.
Yes. My intention was to join what it was called, or what is known as the Silent Service, which is submarine service, and that was what I wanted. And the reason I wanted it was because I had been reading Julius Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I found that to be very interesting. And of course, we didn't have submarines where I lived, so I had an adventurous mind, and so I wanted to be a submariner. But when I got to the induction station, and that's what I told them, I want to join the Marine Corps. They said, well, unfortunately, you can't, because there's federal legislation that prohibits that, and says that all Navajo males from that date to the end of the war were required to join the Marine Corps. And so I didn't ask any questions about it. If that was the requirement of the government, and I wanted to be in the military, go ahead with it.
Okay. So, they send you to boot camp, and where'd you go to boot camp?
Went to boot camp in San Diego at the Marine Corps something. I'll forget what they call it.
Was it called Camp Pendleton?
No, not Camp Pendleton.
Okay.
Camp Pendleton is north of Marine Corps Recruit Depot. Is what they call it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there. And while during the time of my induction, they would give sort of an interview, and so they wanted to know, why I wanted to join the Marine Corps and so forth, and they asked me a whole bunch of different questions. So my question was, why are you asking these questions when they don't seem to tie in with my enlistment? And the sergeant that was doing the questioning said, we ask these questions because one of these days your head will be shot off on the beach of one of the islands, and we'll need something to identify you.
Oh, okay. Wow. It's kind of morbid.
Yeah.
So I take it you're fluent in Navajo. So
yes.
So they took you in. Okay. And so they send you to boot camp, and did they take all the other Navajo men together, and you were all bunking together?
Well, in the very beginning they did. When I enlisted, they're known as the first 29. The name because there were 29 that actually joined the Marine Corps and were selected for that specific duty, although they were not told what the duty would be. There were supposed to be 30 of them, but there were only 29 showed up, and for all that time since the day that the first 29 were signed up, there has always been that question, what happened to the other guy? And I was reading the papers, the newspaper, here recently, where uh, Carl Gorman's daughter did a lot of research on that and discovered who that missing 30th person was, and so that was cleared up.
Oh, okay.
But so uh, so we weren't told what we were wanted for, and so a lot of the guys had different ideas, and three or four of the guys, maybe five, were actually over age, but they didn't admit that they were, and so they were allowed to enlist. And the story is that they were sitting around, and one of them had just been fired from his job with, I believe it was with some government job, and so he doesn't have a job, and so he says I'd rather be killed by the Japanese than to starve to death here on the reservation.
Oh, yeah.
That was his reason for wanting to get into the military. But then also he talked to his friend, and he said, "We don't know what job they're going to give us, but probably they're going to make me a general and make you a private." Because he didn't know what these ranks meant.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But that was what his idea of it was.
Oh, okay. So how long were you in basic training?
I believe it was 8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Back then.
Oh, wow, that's pretty quick. And
yeah.
So, like the 8 weeks, you went into basic training, and then what happened after that?
After basic training, we were given, I believe it was 10-day liberty. Mm-hmm. And then we were to report to Camp Pendleton, and that's what we did. And when we reported to Camp Pendleton, we found out that we would be developing or working with a code comprised by the ancient Navajo language. And so that's the first time that we knew what they wanted us to do, what our job was going to be.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, from what I read is like they had the alphabet, but each letter was associated with a Navajo word.
Right. That's right. Some of the letters of the alphabet that are used more frequently had 3 Navajo code words.
Oh, okay.
For instance, the letter A, there was 3 letters, 3 words rather in Navajo. One was apple, the other was ant, the other was axe. And in the Navajo language, none of those words begin with the letter A.
Yeah, yeah.
And so nobody would know what we're talking about. In fact, I had a friend that was in the Navy, and he was a tail gunner on an aircraft that flew off of one of the carriers. And he says that one morning they were flying over one of these islands, and he heard Navajo speaking the Navajo language. And he listened, but he couldn't make out what they were talking about. He said they were using terms like eggs and potatoes, and they were talking about a pig.
So he was like overhearing like a grocery list.
Yeah. So he said those guys are down there having a big time having breakfast while I'm up here getting shot at. Well, they weren't talking about breakfast. They were talking about bombs and grenades and something that started with the letter P.
Oh, okay. So potatoes. How would you say that in Navajo? And then what would that literally translate to?
Well, it it would translate straight across to the word is numasi for potatoes, and so the receiving code talker, well, he'd know that not to write down potatoes,
Uh,
but he'd know to write down the letter P.
oh, okay. And then so on and so forth.
Yeah, right.
Translated himself.
Yeah, right,
Okay, into English.
right.
Oh, okay.
And when he received the message, then he would have written it down in English and given it to the proper person there.
Oh, okay. And how long were you all in training for the code?
Different lengths of time. The first group probably were in training for the longest time, which I would just estimate to be maybe 8 or 10 months.
Oh, okay.
And then gradually, as time went on and the battles became more intense, the time of the training was reduced. And so, if I remember correctly, my training time was about 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
And
Oh, okay. So when did your training stop? Like, do you remember the month and year?
no, I don't remember. I don't even remember my birthday. You know, you usually don't remember your wife's birthday, but I don't remember mine either.
Oh, okay. So when you were done with the training school, did were you sent out in the Pacific?
Yes. Um, Before we were sent out in onto the battlefield, the code was tested, given a field test. Nobody knew that this was going to happen, and on top of that, they didn't know that it was going to be in a language that they had never heard,
Yeah.
and so they were field testing it. It was picked up by the Coast Guard of California, and they got the idea that the Japanese had overrun the Marine positions in America on the West
Oh, okay.
Coast
Okay.
because the signal was strong
Yeah. Yeah.
and the language was, they thought it was Japanese.
Oh, so they got
And
nervous.
so they sent out what they call a red alert. And so they went out looking for these people that caused all this ruckus and commotion. But I never understood how they knew whom to look for. They didn't know anything about Navajos, but somehow or another they tracked down two of the Navajos
Uh-huh.
that were involved in that. Well, there were more than two, but they tracked down these two,
Uh-huh.
and they detained them and began interrogating them. But one of the first things that you learn when you go into the military is that if you're captured, the only information you give is name, rank, and serial number,
Yeah.
and so that's all that they would give. I mean, the interrogation was becoming really serious, but that's all the information they would give.
Yeah.
And so those that were doing the interrogation were getting pretty well fed up with it. And so they were, it is said they were ready to take him out and shoot him. But like the old time movie with, I suppose, John Wayne and so forth, the cavalry shows up right on time. And that's what happened there in that room where the code talkers were being interrogated. The the officer that was in charge of the code talker school showed up, and he said, "These are my boys. You leave them alone." And so that was the end of that. That was a field test, the first test under simulated battlefield conditions of the code, and so it was determined that it was ready to be used under battlefield tactical conditions. And then not too long after that, the the code talkers, some of them, not all of them, were they called it shipped out back then.
Yeah.
Today, you don't use terms like that, but you're deployed.
Yeah.
That's nicer tone, not nicer language, I guess. But anyway, we didn't know what shipped out was meaning, or meant rather, and so we were shipped out, and the destination turned out to be Guadalcanal. Now, all of this time, the Japanese were winning every battle on every island. They had these islands under control, and they were fortified.
Yeah.
And they had troops that they could call on a moment's notice. And so the Japanese would listen in to the American military broadcasts. Well, it wasn't broadcast, but they would listen in to the radio transmissions.
Yeah.
And of course, quite a few of the Japanese had attended Ivy League institutions in America, so they could speak the language very well. When you heard them, you couldn't tell that they were Japanese. And so they would break into the American frequency and listen in, and then they would say, "Thank you, Yanks." That's what they called us.
Uh-huh.
We'll be waiting for you. And they were waiting. They knew everything that the Americans were going to do, when they were going to do it, what equipment, the composition of the military unit, everything. They knew it, and so they were ready, and so they would win that battle. And so those were dark times for America. It looked as though America would lose the war, and they were headed in that direction. But I need to go back a ways to the idea, the conception of the idea that Native American language, specifically Navajo, could be used as an unbreakable code. And that goes back to Philip Johnston, who was not a Native American. He was just a plain common American.
Uh-huh.
But he got the idea. Now, he got that idea long before World War II. He got that idea in World War I, but he couldn't persuade any of the ranking people in the military that it would work. They didn't think it would work because it had been tried with various tribes in maneuvers in Louisiana and all that part of the country, and it didn't work well. Those tribes served well with a few of their members, but they never developed a code. They tried to do it with language that you would use with your family or with another person, and so it didn't work. Well, none of us, none of the tribes, not any of the tribes, had military equipment, so you couldn't say machine guns or dive bombers or battleships and that type of thing, and so it just didn't work. But Philip Johnson couldn't get that idea out of his mind, and so when he would hear reports of what was happening in the Pacific, and he would realize that the battles were being won by the Japanese, and the reason for it was clear to him, and that was we didn't have an unbreakable code, and so he was successful in convincing the officers in the Marine Corps that we should try it. And so they said, we don't think so. But if you want to do it, you can go ahead and give us a demonstration. So he found Navajos working in Los Angeles. He recruited 4 of them, not into the military, but to do his demonstration.
Mm-hmm.
And they set up a demonstration in 2 different buildings. So the Kotok, rather the Navajos could not see each other because they might make signals and so forth. And so the message was written out, given to the sending Navajo, and he would send it to the other Navajo. And so the result of that demonstration was that there was practically 0 time in encoding.
Mm-hmm.
And when it reached the destination, 0 time again in decoding, and no mistakes. And so they looked at it, they were amazed, but there were a lot of skeptics. They said, it won't work, it's not going to work. But it was decided that I think the Marine Corps asked for many more than 30, but it was cut down to 30.
Okay.
And so that was the beginning of the Code Talker program. So there were already some Navajos in the Marine Corps.
Were they just like kind of herded into that program?
They had chosen to be in it.
Okay.
And they were regular Marines, infantry or artillery, whatever the case might have been. But when the Code Talker program began, there were at least maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 that were placed in the Code Talker program. And out of those, at least 1 became a recruiter, not a full-time, all-the-time job, but he was a recruiter to recruit Navajos for the Code Talker program. And so he would come to places, very remote places like Window Rock. Window Rock back then was quite remote. There was no paved roads, and so he would go to those places and talk to the people. But he couldn't tell them what the program was because he didn't know either. All he could say was Navajos are wanted by Washington for a special job, and so there were some Navajos, young Navajo boys, that when they would listen to him and they would see him in this uniform, he wore the Marine Corps Blues uniform. That's sort of like a parade uniform, and they would say they liked it. They wanted to be. That's how I want to be. That's I want to be a Marine like this Navajo is a Marine, and so it wasn't difficult to recruit the 30, and later on it wasn't difficult to recruit more. They kept enlisting. Most of them were enlisted. Some were drafted, but most of them were had enlisted, and so they went through the regular boot camp training. Navajos excelled in boot camp training, where you had endurance situations, and the Navajos had always had endurance circumstances that they lived with, and so it wasn't anything new. So they would excel in that, and so when they were shipped out to the battle zone, Guadalcanal was the first one, and there were code talkers assigned to every division of the Marine Corps. Up until 43, there were 5 divisions. In 43, a 6th division was organized, and code talkers were assigned there. The assignment went something like this: 2 code talkers at a regimental level, and then as you went on up to division level, you had more code talkers at division level.
Okay.
There would be code talkers on battleships and various other strategic places. I was talking here some few years past to another code talker whom I had known before he went into the military, and we were talking about some messages that had been sent by code talkers, and one of them was a message that I had sent, and that was when you see, with each division, the use of the code talkers sometimes was expanded to not only being the job of the code talking, sending messages, but doing other things as well. So I found myself at a number of times on patrols. Some patrols were what do you call it? Can't think of the name there. But the other patrol would be a combat patrol.
Okay.
And so on a certain combat patrol that I was with, had my radio, and my job was to report what's happening. And Japanese wouldn't understand if we were maybe running low on ammo, then we would report that, but we'd report it in Navajo code, as Japanese wouldn't know that we're running low on ammo.
Yes.
And so forth. And so the situation was that we came upon this ridge, and we met. We were welcomed with intense fire from the Japanese who had entrenched along that ridge.
Is this in Guadalcanal or is this another island?
This was later. This was on Okinawa.
Okinawa.
Yes.
Okay.
And so as we came over the top of that ridge, we were greeted with enemy fire. And so the patrol was pinned down. If we tried to advance, we probably wouldn't make it very far. And to complicate matters, the antenna of my radio had been shot off or blown off by shrapnel, and so we couldn't get out. My attitude was I felt that I was invincible. Of course, I wasn't, but that's the way I felt.
Yeah.
I mean, I could do anything. A young person feels that way. Mm-hmm. And after he gets a little older, he knows that that's not the case. But I felt invincible. And so we were on this ridge, and we were pinned down by heavy enemy fire, and my radio antenna was gone. And so I said to the captain of the patrol, I said, I can run down and get you have a covering fire for me, and I can run down. There were I could identify 3 machine gun nests there. I can run down and take these machine gun nests out. I said I can do that, and that's what I wanted to do. But he said no. He said your job is to get this radio fixed and get us some reinforcements. And so when I think of it now, I think I should have just kind of not heard him. You know, a lot of noise on the battlefield, and gone ahead with what I wanted to do. But that it didn't develop that way. I was successful in repairing the antenna and getting it back where the radio would work. and I called in an airstrike from the planes were called Corsairs, and they were piloted by Marines, and they flew off carriers. So in no time at all, the airstrike occurred and put the enemy out of business. And all we had to do was just mop up there. Now, while I'm talking about requesting an airstrike, I forgot what that meant.
Oh no, that's
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay.
Continue.
Requesting an airstrike. When an airstrike had to be requested, or a lifting of artillery fire, it had to be done in the Navajo code, because the Japanese could duplicate how it would be sent in English.
Yeah.
And if the artillery was being fired to a Japanese position and hitting there, the Japanese could come on our radio frequency in English and say, "You're firing on our own troops, so lift this fire."
Mm-hmm.
And so we couldn't transmit that type of request in English. Had to be in Navajo there. So and I guess about time I can wind up. I could talk all day about it. You see, when the code was classified, 23 years after the war, it was declassified, and they said, "Okay, you guys, you can go ahead and talk about it now."
Yeah, that was in 1968.
Yeah, and we didn't want to talk about it by then.
Yeah. I mean, even then, like when the war ended in August of '45, did you even mention it to anybody?
Nobody.
Nobody at all.
No, I mentioned earlier here this morning that I had 3 brothers that were code talkers, but we never said a word about it.
Even to each other.
And no, never to each other. Our parents never knew what we did. Nobody knew what we did.
It was just classified.
And sometimes in a sort of a joking way, I said, "Well, we didn't know what we were doing either."
Oh, okay.
And anyway, so forgot what else I was going to say there.
Well, let me see. So where were you at when the war ended in Japan with the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs? Do you remember where you were at that time?
Yes, I remember distinctly where I was. I was on a hill on the island of Okinawa, and we were in what is called a reserve. Of course, everybody was really in reserve then because there was no battles going on at that time.
I think they were preparing to invade Japan, the mainland.
You're right. That's true. Yes. And so we were on this hill when I don't remember exactly how the message came. It didn't come by code, by Navajo code, but it reached our unit, and so the general said, "Well, we have to celebrate." And he said, "We're going to celebrate with, of course, every celebration you use alcohol."
Yeah.
But the only alcohol that was available was they called it sick bay alky. That was all that was available, and so they poured a little shot glass of that sick bay alky, and I think they had grapefruit juice or something like that. And so that was celebrated by raising that and so forth. So that's where we were when we got that word. I'd like to say a word about another code talker that is the only code talker that captured, I believe it was 16 Japanese soldiers by himself.
Oh, okay.
Um, he was assigned to do a mop-up with several other Marines.
Uh-huh.
It was following a nighttime attack by the Japanese, and all of the Japanese were annihilated, but still there may be some there that weren't,
Uh-huh.
and so the Marines were assigned a small group to do a mop-up, and so they were doing that, and they came upon a place where this code talker says the bush kept moving and there was no wind.
Uh-huh.
And so he investigated that and he saw a Japanese down in that hole. And so he had learned a few Japanese terms, and one of them was come up with your hands out, come out with your hands up.
Uh-huh.
And so the 1, 2, 3, up to 16 came out of there.
Wow.
There. And so he was a very quiet guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were other Marines that weren't so quiet, and they said, Chief, we'll take him in.
Uh-huh.
And so they got the credit for it. He didn't get the credit for it.
Oh, wow. So when World War II ended, when did so you just came back here to the reservation after the war was over?
Yeah, just came back to my home and kind of tried to figure out what I wanted to do. What I did was I went to work at a Marine Corps depot in Barstow.
Oh, okay.
They handle all kind of parts and
Uh-huh.
for the Marine Corps. I worked there for maybe a couple of years, and then I came back home. It was a time when Navajos go out and pick piñons.
Yeah.
And there was a bumper crop of piñons that fall, and so I decided I'm going to set up a trading post where the people are picking piñons.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and I and my brothers bought piñons and sold food supplies and different things of that sort for that season. And after that, I worked as a lumberjack for a while. But my ambition, I suppose, my heart was still in a military mode.
Uh-huh.
And so I decided I'm going to go into the military. And I had been talking to one of my younger brothers who had served as in the 82nd Airborne.
Uh-huh.
And he went into the Marine Corps when he was 12 years old.
Wow. Okay.
But our mother kept writing and said he's only 12 years old. He's got no business in the Marine Corps. So they finally let him go. But then he joined the 82nd Airborne, and so we'd compare our notes, and so it seemed interesting to me. I was still very adventurous and still invincible, and so I said I'm going to join the Airborne, which I did. I was assigned to the 11th Airborne Division, and then I went to later, a few years later, I went to Korea, and I served in Korea. I was wounded in Korea, and I spent a little over a year in Walter Reed Army Hospital recovering from my wounds.
Wow, that's out in Maryland, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, and so after that, your military career was
actually it wasn't.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I remember the doctor in I believe it was Seisabu, Japan, and he came to me and he said, "Got good news and bad news." I said, "Well, give me the good news." And he says, "You're on your way out of the military." I told him that's bad news to me. I said, "I don't want to go out of the military. That's bad news to me." But what's the good news? I forget what the good news was, but it wasn't really good to me. And so he said, "You're on your way out." And so I was determined. I'm not on my way out. And so there was legislation that existed, just like in civilian life, that you can't be fired from a job because of your health condition.
Yeah.
And so I stayed on for a number of years after that. And then finally, I was stationed up in Colorado Springs, and there I became a Christian.
Okay.
I hadn't been a Christian all this time, but even though I wasn't a Christian, the Lord took care of me. I mean,
Okay.
He provided, and so I became a Christian. And then after becoming a Christian, I was driving one morning to my workplace, and I was running a little later than I usually do. And I had to come to, I would cross a railroad crossing. And usually no trains were going either way. But this morning there was a train. It was a passenger train. Had all, had all the lights in it. I could see these people moving about in that passenger train, going about different things of the day. And so as I sat there, I didn't hear the Lord's voice. He didn't say, "Hey, Sergeant." He didn't say that, but he spoke to my heart. And he said, "I want you to talk about eternal destinations." So these folks are on a certain destination, but some of them don't realize that there is an eternal destination, and that's going to be your job. And so he said, I want you to get the message out. And so, still invincible and still adventurous. And so I said, why not?
All right.
And so that's I became a minister of the gospel, and I attended different schools for that, and I also attended school for education, and so I do those things now, even though I'm retired from a job that pays money.
Oh, okay.
I do it for satisfaction, and I suppose that if someone were to ask me, how do you feel about being invincible? So I'm still invincible, but I do it with God this time.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. Thanks for sharing this sharing your story with us.
Happy to do that.
And thank you for your service to this country.
Well,
and we're going to end it here. And have a good